For thousands of years, humans have tried to see the future. Most predictions fade into myth, but a few were so accurate they still haunt us today. From the cryptic whispers of the Oracle of Delphi to visions of plagues in medieval Europe to prophecies that eerily aligned with the Cold War, this is every ancient prophecy that came true, explained in 14 minutes. The Oracle of Delphi and Alexander the Great. High in the mountains of Greece stood the temple of Apollo in Delphi, where a priestess known as the Pythia spoke in riddles. Leaders from across the ancient world traveled there, believing the god himself whispered through her. One of the most famous seekers of prophecy was Alexander of Macedon, the man we now know as Alexander the Great. When he consulted the oracle, the priestess told him something strange. "You are invincible." Some sources say she refused to speak at first, until Alexander dragged her toward the altar. Only then did she cry out, "You are unstoppable." Those words would echo through history as Alexander launched campaigns stretching from Greece to India. But here's the unsettling part. The prophecy was true. And not true. Alexander conquered everything in his path, yet he died suddenly at just 32 years old. The oracle's prediction aligned perfectly with his meteoric rise, but left room for ambiguity, just as so many prophecies do. Was it a warning disguised as praise, or a deliberate riddle meant to bind his faith? The story of Alexander shows how a prophecy didn't just predict history, it shaped it. His belief in being invincible drove him to attempt the impossible and succeed, at least for a time. But if a single prophecy could empower a man to build an empire, what happens when prophecies foretell the collapse of empires themselves? The fall of Rome. The Sibylline Prophecies. Centuries before Rome's decline, there were whispers of doom hidden in the Sibylline books. These were collections of cryptic prophecies, written in riddling verse, said to come from the Sibyls. Women believed to channel the divine. Roman leaders guarded these texts like state secrets. In times of crises, senators would consult them, hoping the words might offer guidance or warning. What makes the Sibylline prophecies haunting is their eerie resonance with Rome's eventual fate. They spoke of a great empire undone not by outsiders alone, but by corruption, moral decay, and endless internal strife. Over time, Rome fractured under its own weight. Political assassinations, civil wars, plagues, economic collapse, and the final sack of the city in 410 CE. Historians debate whether these prophecies were later reinterpreted to match events, but the parallels are impossible to ignore. The vision of an empire rotting from within sounded more like history than myth once Rome actually fell. Even Augustine, in his City of God, acknowledged the uncanny fit between prophecy and reality. The Sibylline warnings reminded Rome of a truth it didn't want to face, that even the mightiest empire has an expiration date. And while Rome's collapse seemed destined, another ancient civilization was busy charting time itself with unnerving precision. The Mayan calendar cycles. Most people think of the Mayan calendar only in connection with 2012, when the world was supposedly going to end. But that idea was a modern misrepresentation, as the truth is far more impressive. You see, the Maya built one of the most sophisticated systems of time the ancient world had ever seen. Using their long count calendar, they predicted celestial events with astonishing accuracy. Solar eclipses, lunar cycles, even the movements of Venus could be charted centuries in advance. Archaeologists have found inscriptions showing that Mayan astronomer priests could pinpoint an eclipse to the exact day, something modern science only confirmed with advanced mathematics and telescopes. For the Maya, prophecy wasn't about vague symbols. It was about patterns, cycles, and the belief that history itself repeated in great cosmic turns. To them, disasters, harvests, and the rise and fall of rulers all followed rhythms written into the heavens. Their predictions came true because they had decoded the mechanics of time itself. When Spanish conquistadors arrived, they were shocked to discover how much the Maya already knew about the sky. These weren't wild guesses. They were calculated forecasts centuries ahead of their time. The Mayans showed prophecy could live in numbers and stars, but in Europe, prophecy would take on another face. As one man whose cryptic verses still burn with fear because of the fire he seemed to describe long before it ever happened. Nostradamus and the Great Fire of London. In the 16th century, a French physician named Michel de Nostradamus, better known as Nostradamus, began publishing cryptic quatrains that he claimed foretold the future. His writings were cloaked in riddles, metaphors, and shifting languages, which made them both frustratingly vague and endlessly interpretable. But one passage in particular has haunted historians. In Century 2, Quatrain 51, Nostradamus wrote, "The blood of the just will commit a fault at London, burnt through lightning of 23's the 6. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, several of the same sect will be killed." Centuries later, in 1666, London was engulfed in one of the most devastating fires in European history. It started in a bakery on Pudding Lane and raged for 4 days, destroying over 13,000 houses and nearly every major building within the city walls. For people already terrified by the year, with its ominous 666, the prophecy seemed chillingly fulfilled. The ancient lady was London herself, brought to her knees by fire. Skeptics argued that the verse is too vague, that it only seems clear in hindsight. But to those living in 1666, the timing, the imagery, and the devastation aligned too closely to ignore. It cemented Nostradamus as the prophet of Europe, someone whose words could leap across centuries to explain catastrophe. For believers, the Great Fire proved that his vision was real. But England wasn't finished with prophets. In the generations that followed, another figure would rise, a woman born in a cave whose verses of plagues, inventions, and disasters would make her the most feared fortune teller of her age. Mother Shipton. In 16th century England, stories spread of a strange woman born in a cave near Knaresborough. Her name was Ursula Southiel, but history remembers her as Mother Shipton, a prophetess whose verses seemed to reach far beyond her own age. Her prophecies were written in rhymes and riddles, much like Nostradamus. Some verses printed decades after her death spoke of disasters that sounded eerily familiar. One line described a plague that shall sweep the land, and many later linked it to the Black Death and the later Great Plague of London in 1665. Another spoke of carriages without horses, which people in the 19th century claimed foresaw trains and motor vehicles. She even wrote of ships shall sail around the world, as thoughts fly swifter than a bird, which Victorians believed hinted at global exploration and even flight. The power of Mother Shipton's legacy was not in precise detail, but in timing. Each new generation seemed to find echoes of their own world inside her verses. Wars, inventions, natural disasters. Her words were flexible enough to bend with history, yet sharp enough to feel unsettlingly accurate. Though skeptics point out that many of her printed prophecies were edited or even invented by later publishers, her name became synonymous with foresight. For centuries, she was England's witch prophet, a figure villagers invoked when catastrophe struck. Her words haunted Europe, but prophecy wasn't bound to verses alone. In China, an ancient text claimed it could read the very rhythm of history, predicting not just events, but the rise and collapse of entire dynasties. The Chinese I Ching and dynastic cycles. The I Ching, or Book of Changes, was one of the oldest texts in the world, used to interpret the balance of fate through hexagrams, 6 lines broken or unbroken representing shifting forces of yin and yang. Rulers consulted the I Ching not only for personal guidance, but to understand the fate of dynasties. Chinese philosophers developed the idea of the dynastic cycle, where empires rose under virtue, prospered, decayed through corruption, and finally collapsed under rebellion or invasion. This cycle repeated again and again, from the Zhao to the Han to the Tang. Each fall seemed to prove the text's claim that change was inevitable, and no ruler could resist it. The I Ching did not describe itself as fortune-telling in the Western sense. It was more like a cosmic map, suggesting that human affairs were tied to universal rhythms. Wars, floods, droughts, even the shifting mandate of heaven itself were framed as part of an eternal turning wheel. For those living through dynastic upheavals, the predictions of collapse felt terrifyingly real. The Ming dynasty's fall to the king in the 17th century looked like another turn of the cycle foretold long before. Prophecy here wasn't a single dramatic vision, but a worldview where history itself was fated to rise, peak, and fall. The I Ching showed that destiny could be read in patterns as much as in visions. But in medieval Europe, prophecy turned visceral again, carried in the visions of a woman who claimed to see plagues, storms, and chaos centuries before they struck. Hildegard of Bingen. In the 12th century, a German abbess named Hildegard of Bingen claimed to receive visions from God. She described them in vivid detail, often blending technology, medicine, and prophecy. Unlike vague riddles, her writings read like direct warnings. One vision spoke of great plagues that would sweep through nations, where people would fall in vast numbers and cities would be left silent. Centuries later, Europe was devastated by the Black Death in the 14th century, which wiped out as much as half the continent's population. To later readers, her words felt like an eerie foreshadowing of the pandemic. Hildegard also wrote of natural upheavals, fiery comets, storms, floods, and earthquakes that would signal coming judgment. Medieval audiences believed she had glimpsed disasters far beyond her own time. What makes her unique is how specific she often was, weaving her visions into the daily realities of health, politics, and environment. She even recorded remedies for illnesses that modern researchers now recognize as accurate herbal treatments. Whether one believes her visions were supernatural or the result of a brilliant and observant mind, her impact was enormous. Hildegard became a voice of both fear and authority, shaping how people imagine the connection between divine will and earthly catastrophe. Her visions carried the weight of the apocalypse, yet they were grounded in a reality that history would eventually confirm. But prophecy did not stop in the Middle Ages. Even in the modern world, the tradition continued through figures who claimed to see conflicts that reshaped the 20th century. Baba Vanga and the Cold War. You see, prophecy did not die with the ancients. In the 20th century, a blind Bulgarian mystic named Baba Vanga gained worldwide fame for her supposed visions of the future. She lost her sight as a child during a storm and from then on claimed to see events long before they happened. During the Cold War, her predictions captured the imagination of millions. She reportedly foresaw the division of Europe, the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union, and even hinted at the 9/11 attacks decades before they occurred. To those who believed, she was a modern counterpart to the oracles of the past, proof that the human desire to glimpse tomorrow had never faded. Skeptics point out that her sayings, like Nostradamus, were often vague and open to interpretation, but the timing of her rise during one of the most dangerous standoffs in history gave her words an edge of urgency. Nuclear annihilation felt like it was only one misstep away, and a prophet claiming to know the outcome drew attention far beyond her small Bulgarian village. Baba Vanga became a symbol of how prophecy adapts to its age. In antiquity, it spoke through temples and sacred texts. In the Middle Ages, through visions and sermons. And in modern times, through figures who blurred the line between folklore and global politics. So the next time someone mentions an ancient prophecy, don't just dismiss it as legend. Ask yourself, how many of these old warnings were closer to truth than we'd like to admit? Because behind every prophecy is a story of fear, of belief, of people trying to make sense of the unknown. Some shaped empires, others haunted generations, and maybe, just maybe, there are more waiting to play out. If you want more deep dives into the hidden corners of history, you know what to do. Like, comment, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, which of these prophecies shook you the most?